I am.
All right. Well, your timing was perfect because we are now officially live.
We
So,
are live.
um, so welcome to another Run Wild with Us. Ask Us Anything. I'm Lisa Diane Kastner. I'm the founder and executive editor of Running Wild and Rise, and I'm here with the amazing, incredible Ben, who needs no last name.
Oh yeah, I'm a one name guy.
And we are here to answer any old questions that you may have around, well, it could be anything actually, whatever you want. It's all good. Most people do elect to ask us questions about publishing and creative writing and all that kind of stuff. So you're welcome to stay within that space. But if you want to expand and ask other stuff, go for it. It's all good. So
we have answers.
We have, yeah, it may not be the right answers, but there'll be answers. So how are you doing, young man? What have you been up to this past week?
Doing well. Doing well. Finished. We sent another collection of short stories off to production this week, and I have started a novel.
Oh wow! Check you out.
And so it just keeps on going. And I've had a couple of authors email me and say, "Hey, when are you going to get to my book?"
Yeah, me too.
I said, how about the Ides of March there, Shakespeare?
That's kind of you, dude, because I don't know that I can make that promise. That seems kind of soon, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, it does. It's a month away.
Not even. You got yourself 2 weeks. Whoops. Caroline says, "Hey, Lisa. Hey, Ben. Hey, Caroline. It's always fabulous to see you." Well, yeah, I had a bunch of, hey, what am I next? And I was like, as soon as I can find an editor who's not insanely busy and losing their minds. So, thankfully, one of our editors actually did reach out to me asking if we had anybody for him. So, I also just came from the incredible San Francisco Writers Conference. And let me tell you, I usually go to bed between like 9 and 10 p.m. I think I was lucky to get to bed, get to my hotel room by like midnight every night. So I'm definitely in recovery mode, to put it politely.
So that was a good sign, though. It must have been good.
Oh yeah, lots of great questions, a lot of great questions in the panels. Some really interesting writing because I made myself available to take pitches. I was a little surprised because normally what we lovingly in the industry call BarCon, I mean, usually you see like almost the entire conference, right, in the bar. And this time, I'd say maybe a third, if that, actually hung out at the bar afterwards.
Wow.
So yeah, I don't know if it's just like a post-COVID thing, you know.
Yeah.
Or well, actually, so this was bizarre. So when I showed up on Thursday, the hotel was like in mass chaos. Like, I mean, people are all in the hallway and they're all like running around. And there was both the writers conference as well as another event there. Well, it turned out they have this huge fountain in the center of the hotel, and it had overflown. And so it flooded like this whole area. And at the same time, the power went out in key parts of the hotel. So some rooms had no power. I had no hot water, and I didn't have hot water, and I had no heat, but I did have power. But like the lovely young woman, Jordan, who's one of our authors, she actually texted me and said, "Can I use your hairdryer in your bathroom so I can get ready?" She had nothing. She had none of the above. But they got everything, set up and fixed, I want to say by like late Friday, something like that, or at least Saturday. So, but yeah, so I mean, that could have also contributed to the lack of individuals that, yeah. But I thought, so to remind everybody who's watching and anyone who's watching the recording, what we do is we take questions in the chat, in the comment section of whatever venue you're watching this. We're across Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and when I remember, TikTok, which means I usually don't remember to do that. But hey, but you go ahead, you ask whatever questions you want in that comment section. What I do is I repeat the question that was submitted, and then we take turns in responding to it. So if you have a question, again, feel free and go ahead and pop it into the comment section, and we are more than happy to respond. Now, if we don't get any questions, I thought this time, since I just came from a conference, it might be kind of cool for us to take turns answering some of the common questions that I received at the conference.
Yeah.
So one of the big ones I got, there actually turned out to be a big memoir representation at the conference. So my question to you is, Ben, what do you look for when you're looking at memoirs? Like, what constitutes a solid memoir?
I think there's a need for a universal appeal. And so I would connect that to the human experience, because you're sharing a human experience that you need to make, one, human, and two, shareable, to where it invokes empathy or interest, some kind of interest in that's an interesting experience that you're sharing, or series of experiences that you're sharing. And so that it can't just, well, it can be, but it shouldn't be just to a limited audience that is very small. I think you want to broaden it up and have as big of an audience of humanity that you can, because you're writing about a human experience, and it is shared. And so human experience is usually shared in our stories. So I think behind the memoir, there's got to be a good story, and relatable even to people who have never been in that situation, maybe especially to people who've never been in that situation, but who are learning from your experience and are interested in, well, what's going to happen? How's this going to turn out? And in the broader scheme, not just turning out for one individual or two individuals, but how would it apply across humanity? Ooh.
Wow, that was good. There's all fancy words. Humanity.
Because the memoir is it's more humanity than anything, because it is that human experience, and somebody lived through it, and it's not fiction. It can be creative, but it's still not fiction.
Yeah, it's funny. So I completely agree, and I gave a couple of examples from our own list and from my personal experience. So, like, one of our biggest sellers of all time has been Mickey the Giveaway Boy, which is about a gentleman growing up actually outside of San Francisco during the Great Depression, and what was done commonly during the Depression, and honestly in a lot of other periods of history, parents sold off their kids, basically indentured servitude, for years at a time or months at a time, to those who were upper class, so that they could feed the rest of their family. But they also knew the child was, they'd have to be fed, right? In that servitude, right? And so it was, he basically retold his experiences during. And to your point, it. And we've got Peter. Woo! So I'm going to finish answering this question, but Peter, then you have to take a shot at it. it's what are you looking for when you're looking at potential memoirs for us to pick up? So I was given the example of Mickey the Giveaway Boy, which was one of our first books that we picked up, and it still sells really well every year. About a gentleman's experience when his parents basically sold him off for a couple of years at a time in indentured servitude to pay to so his parents could afford to basically feed the rest of the family. And another one that not only sold really well, but we got a bunch of awards for was Frontal Matter Glue Gone Wild, about when a woman first found out she had brain cancer. And we actually published 3 memoirs in her experience of that. And I think to Ben's point, 2 big things that at least, other than great writing and a narrative arc, it's a limited period of time, and there's something in it that draws someone into it where they say, I really want to read that. And, because there's an implication that they're going to get something out of it, right? Whether it's a learning or, a feeling of euphoria when it's done, that kind of thing. And my example of like one thing that I would not like don't do it just as like a regurgitation of words, right? So like, all 3 of us have MFAs, which is completely an accident. But like mine is my major's a dual major in fiction and nonfiction, and it was because I had written about 100 pages of a memoir, and it starts off with I died at the age of 9, not brain dead. That would have taken a few more minutes. Right. And it goes from there. And, anyone who hears that, they go, oh my God, you have to write that. But the reality is, I don't know what the theme of this is. I don't really know the narrative arc for it, because there was so much going into it that made that statement true, that I don't know what to glom onto, if that makes sense. And I don't know what I want the reader to take out of it. So I've never finished it, and I saw a lot of that, a lot of like, it was like a regurgitation of all this horrific stuff in a pitch. And then I'm like, well, what's the reader supposed to take out of it? And they would just like stare at me like, I just told you. And I'm like, no, you telling me that, your dog tried to kill you. That is not, I don't think you want that as the final takeaway, right? So anyway, so what do you think, Peter? What do you look for, and what any like recommendations for an aspiring memoirist?
Well, I always have one it's so well written. It's an ideal memoir in my mind. I'll tell you about it in a minute. But as you were saying, this the minutia is what I don't want to see, because I've read memoirs or nonfiction pieces where they go into how Uncle Ted looked when he walked into the room that Christmas Eve, and what he was carrying and what he was doing. And none of this has anything to do with the story, but you're still telling it to us, and it doesn't matter. What matters is what's important to the story, what's important to the narrator, and above all, what's important to the reader, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, like you said, you want us to get them to get something. You want them to get something out of it, to have a takeaway. So for some odd reason, I've been thinking about my own past about, do I remember ever eating in that apartment on the Northwest Side? Like, no, I don't have any recollection of eating there. I mean, I was a broke theater student our theater thespian at the time, but I don't remember those details. Therefore, those details don't matter to whatever story I may write about that time in my life, because that stuff just gets washed under the bridge when the more impactful things come across or come out of the book. Mm-hmm. The first thing that comes to mind about memoirs and make them noteworthy or whatever is the tawdry details. Everybody wants to hear what's behind the doors, or what the authors are keeping from the readers. Now, giving credence to that, some of that is essential to a good story, but it's not the main theme. What the story is about. The story is about everything surrounding that moment, about why that moment had to happen the way it happened. The whys and wherefores, rather. So there's just so much more that the thematic arc that you were talking about. I mean, it needs to be approached. I have a dear friend who graduated with, just like you, a creative fiction and a creative nonfiction double MFA.
Mhm.
And I kind of look at them both the same way, not to insult or cast a shade on that, but it's all storytelling. And I say that over and over again, but it's all storytelling. It's about what are you trying to immerse your reader in? What are you trying to give to your reader so that they feel like they've walked the world in your shoes for a couple months, couple years, couple whatevers, and they come away with something that they can identify with. I guess that's my final statement, is they can identify with, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So.
Something is better than nothing, the memoir we published. And I jumped at the chance to edit that one because it's a soldier coming home story, but it's not the soldier telling it. It's his wife. And so the memoir with a different perspective on something that is very common and you can kind of guess of the storyline of the soldier coming home and what he's going to face. But it was interesting to see it from the perspective of the wife who was going to go through it and did go through it. And so that was another thing about the memoir that I liked about that one for sure. It was a different perspective and it took a common theme, but shifted the point of view.
If I can ask you a question about that, Ben, when you're done.
Go. He had that look of like, huh?
Did she ever break point of view? I mean, did she ever go inside the soldier's head, or was it all first person from her point of view, or third person kind of thing? That's
what she would describe his behaviors and filter his behaviors through what she was feeling. So you got the tension. There was tension there, and it was some flashback to the relationship, and so it was the relationship being strained through the tension of the circumstances of their marriage and of his job, and what he had to do and coming home. And it was but it also not only his, but the whole military community was depicted very truthfully, but on a subtle level, it was a facade because from the outside, all the houses looked, everybody's falling back into place normally. But without saying it wasn't happening, that it wasn't happening. So there was the whole environmental aspects around the relationship, and then within the relationship itself, and what she was facing. And then of course there were some family issues that were beyond, some other tests of relationships within the family that had to be addressed as well. And she brought those in very nicely to add to the tension. It's not just, you don't freeze everything out because your husband just came home from a war. There's still stuff going on in normal everyday family stuff that you have to address. And again, the value of that memoir, I thought, and again, why I jumped at editing it was because of that different perspective.
In that respect, it would seem like the minutia would be more of an important thing to include in the story because of how reassimilating himself into civilian life from a war. Interesting.
Oh yeah, and I mean, he was pushing back against help and assistance, and to a certain point, she was letting him because she didn't know what else to do. She couldn't put herself in his shoes to change the POV to his POV. She wasn't going to do that. She couldn't do that.
Right.
But she could describe what he was doing, and so the reader picked up on his POV through what she was telling us his behaviors were.
Interesting.
Which was probably a more honest and truthful POV than just saying, well, this is what he felt. Because she didn't know.
Right.
She just didn't know.
Wow. That was solid. Great questions, guys. and great answers. So another question that I got was, like, what is like, do we look for stories that are memoirs, especially that, are we just looking for someone with a great platform? Like, what is it that we're looking for when we first read? I would say, Peter, to your point, not just a memoir, but any story that we receive. Like, you know, what specifically do you think engages you? And why don't we start with Peter, since I started with Ben before?
What engages me in memoir? I'd
Well,
say
in any submission, any full length submission. Let's put it that way.
Oh, is it interesting? Does the reader want me to, does the writer make me want to move on to the next sentence, to the next paragraph, to the next chapter kind of thing? And I mean, and it needs to be, or rather, it should be that from the very beginning. But like I said last week, that's not always the case. Sometimes it's the end of the first paragraph that snags you, that yanks you into the story and that you can't let go. I mean, as a matter of fact, the novel I'm editing right now, I keep going back to it because I want to keep reading. I want to see what happens to the characters. And these are two fictional women in Philadelphia, you know? So it's like, it's just that engaging to make me want to keep going. And if I'm reading something and my brain says, hey, what's on TV tonight? Or hey, what's this about? Or hey, let's check out the news. Like, well, that's not engaging to me. That's making my brain isn't active. It is not interested in it. And I mean, a lot of times I'm a big fan of all five senses being introduced early on in the book, because that way you're more in place. You know where the reader is, you know where things are, what it sounds like, what it feels like, what almost tastes like. I mean, a lot of writers, they see the scene in their head and they don't put that into the words. And I'm constantly asking the writer, where are we? What am I looking at? You know, okay, we're at a winding road. What's beside it? You know, where else is everything at? I gotta be in that character's shoes to see what's going on through the story, whether it's first person or third person, whichever one is, because I want to know. And the face of the identities of the characters, as I keep reading, they're not as important as they could be, but the environment is very important to me. Every sense needs to be involved sporadically throughout the book so that you're engaged. You know what's going on. It's not all dialogue. So that's my rambling answer.
How about you, Ben?
I like the fact that it's interesting. Like Peter said, is it interesting? Does it pull you in? And as Peter was giving his answer, I was thinking of the No F's Given introduction with, we always talk about the hook, and we want that hook right away. And in Tim's work, one of the first scenes is the prison that has been converted into U.S. barracks. And in one of the rooms, there's a hook, an actual hook that was used to torture Iraqi civilians. And we had a lot of fun with that. We were talking about it and said, we were looking for a hook and we got one. But that's the kind of thing that draws you in. So it would tell me more about this scene and this environment and engage me totally, like Peter was saying. Is it the writing that does it? Is it the story that does it? Is it a combination of both? It really doesn't matter as long as you've got that reader pulled in and with some emotional buy-in to turn the page, read on, don't put it down. And I think that's important with memoir or with novels. And as an editor, I think we have that third eye that keeps looking for and remembering passages as we read along, and then suddenly the passage earlier wasn't right. And if they're doing that now, they couldn't have done that then, or why did they do that then? And to limit those and keep those to a minimum is another draw. So this is and it's probably an indicator of good writing. And I know my story, and I'm not going to confuse the reader.
So, what got you guys into editing in the first place?
the promise of fame and and riches, fame and riches, fame and riches.
That wasn't here. I'm gonna tell you that much.
I think for me it was just the appeal to see another side of the writing world of work, and to jump in and say, well, can I help authors? And one of the first ones I did was The Faith Machine, and Tone was was thinking, you can't help me. I've edited, and it's as good as is. And why does Lisa have you doing anything to my book?
Yeah, that sounds like Tone.
but there was a scene. I think I got some credibility with they were putting the team back together, and they were traveling along the country, and they went from DC to Atlanta, then back up to Danville, Kentucky, to the insane asylum, I think. But and I asked him, well, if the logic doesn't make any sense, why would they go to DC to Georgia, then back up to Kentucky? Why wouldn't they go to Kentucky first? And he pulled out the map and said, oh, yeah, you're probably right. And I was hooked in. I was in. I had value.
Right.
Suddenly I had value.
How about you, Peter?
I don't know. I mean, in some respect, I think I knew how to edit before I knew how to write. Just because I read so much as a kid, and I just saw how things felt or didn't feel within the words. And I mean, it took me many years of schooling and practice and workshops to get to the level of writing that I enjoy, that I employ. But understanding how to make other people's words better, how to make their words stronger, whether it's nonfiction, whether it's an essay, whether it's a freaking business proposal or a grant, I see things in the words that I can do stuff with and say, well, what about this? Or can you do better here with this phrase? Because, this is kind of cliche. You could pull it off, but, you're a writer. We create cliches. We don't use them kind of thing. So I've always enjoyed, making other people's words stronger, just because I don't know I don't know what part of my brain it comes from, but it just works. I don't know. I mean, I've had some doozies where I really had to put in the elbow grease to make cliche. Really had to work at it to get the writing to where I wanted to be. But my authors have seen success, and I'm really happy for them. So.
Yeah, honestly, when I got the first time I got offered to be an editor, like a real editor, not a, hey, can you put, noun verb agreement correctly kind of thing. Not that sentence made any sense, but hey, my inner voice was like, you don't have the right to edit someone else's work. Like, how dare you even think that, you can do that? And I learned from my, I'd say like my teens and 20s, that as soon as that inner critic pops up, that probably means I need to say yes to whatever the offer is, because someone else sees something in me that I don't see or that I don't understand. And if it's something that is intimidating to me, then it's probably worth, other than like, go kill this person or, beat up this dog or, things like that. Those I'm just going to say no to up front. But, something that I actually, I find I interesting, or I idolize individuals who are doing it really, really well, that then tells me, let me try it. And like, similarly, it was just like, wow, the first time I had an opportunity to really impact someone's life that I was aware of, and their writing, it was like mind blowing. Like, oh my God, I had a part of that. Like, I had an influence that really made a difference. And I think to both your points, like I was hooked. I was like, okay, how else can we, make things better? What else can we do to really not just influence that writer, but every reader who has an opportunity to check out that work. It's incredible, the exponential influence that you can have by doing something as simple as saying, hey, did you realize that this doesn't make sense? You go to Kentucky first, you know.
Mhm.
And because a lot of times that just opens up the story in ways that, you know, you could have never imagined if you didn't give the author that feedback. So
Right.
how about you guys? Like, what are some really cool questions you've gotten, like either at conferences or panels or workshops that you thought, wow, all right, that's really interesting?
Go ahead,
You're
Peter.
both like, stop giving me hard questions.
These are hard questions. I guess the one I get once in a while is why? Why would I want to change this? It works just fine the way it is. And I'm like, this is your story. These are your words. You can take my advice. You don't have to take advice. I'm not taking it personally, but this is why I think you should do it. This is what makes sense to me and to your readers. It's not just me that you're writing to. You're writing to your readers. And that's the biggest thing I try to get across to the author is that every once in a while I ask, you've lost us, or we don't know where we are in this. It's not me doing this; it's we don't know, because the ultimate audience is your readership. So if I ask you something or give you point out something that you might have missed, if you go why, I just think about it for a reason. Think about it, see what you come up with. You know, because it caught me, it threw me out of the story. I've said this before. If you throw me out of the story for even a second, you've thrown me out of the story, and I got to get back into it. And like I said, anything else could pop up. So, so my biggest question is why make the change? It's because I've edited a few books in my life. So, you know,
Now,
I've got the experience. You know, I've run a couple marathons, so I'm not doing it for my own good. I'm doing it for yours.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, great answer. How about you, Ben? Or Ben? I keep forgetting the exclamation point.
Just to piggyback on Peter there, once you get thrown out of the story, you may not want to get back in. And that's even worse than pulling somebody back in and promising I'll do better. You may not have that second chance. The reader may put it down and walk away. But I think that it, not necessarily questions, but conversations I've had recently, with the short stories. If you are submitting a short story that is part of a larger work, make sure that you don't make references to the larger work that the reader doesn't know about, and because they're not gonna track along and know what that character, why that character is doing something that makes total sense in the larger piece, but not in the extracted short story that you've submitted. So there's that to watch out for. And maybe a timely issue that I just came across was the use of pronouns in stories. It's a social trend, and to apply those pronouns, if a person identifies as a they, and that's what you're using in the story, be consistent. Because sometimes the actual grammar kicks in and you switch back to a she or a he when before they were a they, and so it's got to be consistent or you're going to lose your reader again. And so it's nothing against the trend or putting it in a story and making it a current piece, but it's got to be consistent. And once you start a they pronoun, you've got to use the they pronoun all the way through.
Can I piggyback on that?
Yeah, of course. No.
Turn it next week. Okay. So I was very guilty of this way back in my beginnings of my writing careers. I was writing a story. It was actually a war story, and I had a group of guys who were in a platoon, and I named them all like their first names, but I said, "Oh, that's got to be boring. I got to call them by their last name the next time I mention them, and I'll call them by their nickname the next time I mention them." And one of the agents I said this to, I could hear her screaming through her writing, "Use one name for your characters, just one. If you call him Johnson here, don't call him Ben Johnson III there, because then we would think it's another character." And I have tried to keep myself toned down with my authors, but I've run across that a time or two. where they'll call somebody Miss Graves or Becca Graves or Becca or whatever, and just change the names. It just completely throws you because you're trying to make characters out of these names. And if you add another name in there, it like we talked about, it kicks you out of the story. Like who are we looking at here? Who are we listening to? Who are we watching?
Mm-hmm.
So keep your names straight too, just like Ben was saying.
Mm.
Call them they, call them they.
That was actually one of the. My mother was a great reader, and she had read Tolstoy and War and Peace.
Mm.
And one of her complaints was Tolstoy uses different names for the same people, and just to make his novel this big. But I haven't gotten around to reading Tolstoy, but that's one reason why I didn't, because she said it was confusing because of that reason that Peter points out. You don't want to make your reader confused. Don't confuse your reader.
I think Tolstoy could get away with it, though. I think he did.
They did.
He didn't have you or I as an editor. That's why.
That's right. We would have edited it down to 30 pages.
So now, what's your favorite part of the collaborative? Since we all have more of a collaborative methodology when it comes to editing, what's your favorite part of that? So I'll give you both a break, unless Ben, you want to go.
It's rewarding to have the conversation about the value of, or the quality of the work, because you know the author has worked hard and put it together, and there's many times that they don't want to change it. But when you get past that and say, well, we're really focusing on the work. It's nothing to do with you as a person. It's got nothing to do with your writing even. It's how the novel works. And I think you bring in the reader's point of view again, and that's always a good validation of a suggestion. If you don't do this, you're going to confuse the reader. And having those conversations and say, well, yeah, you're right. Let me polish that up front, so now it makes sense down here. And those changes are that add value are good conversations.
Cool. Well, for me, it's that I like it when I ask a leading question. When like we walk into the meeting and at first they're like, almost like, I don't know why we're having this conversation. Like what I sent you was it accomplished exactly what I wanted it to accomplish. That kind of thing. And then I'm like, well, what about this? And for me, it's just sitting back and listening to them, basically figuring it out in the room, like what it is, like why I'm asking these questions, because they realize there are gaps in whatever it was that they were trying to do and that it doesn't quite work. And then it's just a lot of fun to hear them just talk themselves through the story and figuring out oh, now, okay, yep. All right, that makes sense. I'm like, okay, great. So you just gave yourself your own list of to-dos. I'll see you as soon as you're done. So what about you, Peter?
I've got two favorite points. The first is the draft. They send me draft number 1. I send them draft 2. I read draft 3, and that's one of my special moments, because as I'm reading through, invariably the writing is tighter, the story is richer, and I'm reading it along, and it flows much more smoothly or steadily through the story. And sometimes I'll go back and check a portion or a section of the story, saying, was this updated? Was this changed? And it wasn't. It's exactly the same as it was in the first draft, but the stuff they put, the edits they made before that section made this section that much richer. And as this goes throughout the book, it's like the book is more heartfelt, the book is more poignant or more charming or more whatever you want to come up with, or adjective. But the 5th draft, I send them 4s, they send me 5, and it's like that's when all stops go out, because everything just starts hitting on all cylinders. I mean, they put their work in and it shows. And their work, like I said, I don't rewrite anything. I don't make any suggestions to them about what to say or how to write it, but I just ask questions and prompt them. And what they come up with on their own makes the story that much stronger. And this, the Canadian headmistress story, the book I just finished, the long one, I mean, the ending just hit me so hard on the fifth draft. That's just like, that's what we were looking for. That's the emotional release that this story needed. And you just cheer for the main character after that. And she gives just enough time to really cheer for her that headmistress gets everything that she was missing in life. You're just like, go, go, go. So really happy when that comes around.
And honestly, Peter, to your point, I mean, that's really what people are doing when they're reading creative nonfiction and fiction. They're looking for some kind of an emotional release. They're looking for some kind of emotional pull. And so I like, at least for me, sometimes I'll read pieces that, that there's nothing that is inviting the reader to get emotionally engaged. Right. And it feels trite when I ask the question, like, why should I care about this story? Right. What do you want? What is it that you're giving the reader for them to feel like, not only do I want to be here and turning the page, but like I need to, right? And that can be humor, it can be sarcasm, it can be grief, it can whatever it is, but something is pulling that reader in emotionally so that they continue. And I think sometimes, especially new writers, they'll forget that, right? Or they're not thinking about that. They're just thinking, I need to get this, whatever this is, down on paper. And it's actually, that was one, because I was asked, like, how do you write a full narrative? Like, and I was like, well, you can either be a pantser or a plotter. And then I had explained what that is. And my simplified version was, like, when I first started writing, I was a pantser. And what that meant was I thought, oh, I've got this brilliant literary book idea. And I started writing it, and I got probably like 30 pages into it. And I got bored with my own writing. So suddenly it became a thriller, right? And then I got to a point in that I got bored with that. And then it became a mystery. So, and by the end of it, none of the characters were the same ones that I started with, but it doesn't mean I actually solved or resolved anything with those opening characters. They just sort of like disappeared, in the narrative. And God bless my then or sister-in-law, because she actually read the whole damn thing. Now, I have no idea how this woman got through it, because if I got bored after like 30 pages in, God knows what she was going through, right? And that's something that people, when you're writing, you really need to keep at the forefront, is that, like, why am I writing this? What do I want the reader to get out of it by the time they get to the end? And, that can be, you've got it in your head, and you just, play with it all along, or it can be, you're really super detailed, or something in between, but both of you guys, so what do you do? How do you structure your work?
By chapters.
Pussy, that is not what I meant.
It's a solid answer.
It's a you left the door open. Yeah, sure.
I write with a particular direction in mind. With each time I sit down to write, where do I want this scene to progress to? How do I want this resolution, this conflict to grow in this manner? And if I get up to a certain point where I know the tension is at its highest, then I can jump to another character, which is what the book I'm working on right now. I'm working on one with two unique points of view that I'm bouncing between throughout the story. And it's really interesting, because being able to shift mindsets like that from one character to another who are completely opposite on the surface, but underneath they're actually very similar. So it's neat to see where each scene is progressing. And, I'll write, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 pages, then go back and comb through it and add some color, some scenery, the senses, as it were, and then get that cleaned up to a point where I'm like, okay, now I need to forge ahead. And I just keep going like that and shifts and starts and stops and getting the story going and seeing what I can discover along the way. And when I discover something while I'm writing something new, I'll make notes a couple of pages or a section before where I know I want to hint to that or foreshadow that, so the reader isn't taken by surprise that all of a sudden she's able to do this when in this scene they weren't. So it's kind of like my own fact check kind of thing. And of course I'm going to miss things because I'm not my own editor. That's what a professional editor is for. So it fits and starts, but it gets the job done. And it's a lot of fun when you really get into it. It's just a lot of fun because your brain is just firing in all different directions, and you're typing or you're writing, and that's as fast as you possibly can. I mean, ideally, I would write with a pen so I could slowly down, write out my stories, write out my fiction or my essays or whatever. But my pen cannot keep up with my mind. So I'm typing like a madman, trying to go as fast as I can. So I tend to stray or whatever like that. That's what the sobering moments of the editing process comes in, is where I put things all together and take out, the purple donkey over there that really doesn't belong in the story, but it was a great idea at the moment. So,
how about you, Ben? What's your writing methodology?
It's from the poetry view. It's a diminishing square, and so think about painting the floor in a room, and starting from the outside walls. And then painting it in to where when you're there in the middle, what you have is the meaning, and you've painted everything else out. You've brought the reader into the middle where the meaning evokes that or provokes or invokes the emotional response there in the middle of the room. But the key to that is to make sure you start with the right size room. Because if you start painting in a room that's too big, it's going to lose energy. You may run out of paint before you get to to that one little square in the middle. But from an editing point of view, I think sometimes the rules get in the way of writing. And I know the rules say a paragraph has to be 2 sentences, but there are times when I see a line that rates its own hard return, leave it alone on that line. That's it. That's the Jesus wept moment. Jesus wept is a Bible verse all by itself, and it's powerful. And so break the rules for the power of the story, and make that one line your paragraph, your hard paragraph return. This is what happened. But whether it's at the end of a short story or along the way in a novel, if something needs to draw its own attention and stand by itself, let it stand by itself.
Can I ask you a question?
Okay.
How do you know that this line needs a hard stop? How do you know that this line should stand apart? Is it a visual or is it a mental or is it oral? I mean, how do you oral being AURAL?
I think it sometimes it closes a paragraph usually. And so if that's the way you want to close that paragraph, and that line is not just closing the paragraph, it's making a statement on its own. Let it close the paragraph with its own paragraph, and give it the strength it deserves. And so it may be an emotional reaction to it, or like in Obsidian Waste, there was a lot of poetry there where we had to bust it out of the paragraph. It needed to be more poetic, and so we broke it out of the paragraph and made it right justified to even draw more attention to it. And because the writing in that book was it was prose, but it was poetic prose, and it deserved to be in a different format on the page. So we broke it out into we went for digging up old scrolls, and what would you see in old scrolls? Just the fragments. So let's put the fragments over here on the right and make it work as fragments and drive a visual impact to the reader even more than what they're reading. They're seeing it.
Mm.
So sometimes you need to see, I think that line that has its strength, see that it has its strength because it's standing alone.
Cool.
It's a feeling and a suggestion. You know, I don't say, when I do that, I'll tell the reader that this line has got to have its own importance.
Mhm.
And usually they appreciate it and say, yeah, you're right. You mean we can break the rules? Yeah, let's break the rules for this. That's okay.
Yeah, when Ben's reading something that I edited and he says, "Man, you broke a lot of rules in this." but I think it works. I'm like, okay, well, good, then we did it right, you know. So no, but I honestly I think rules are just the starting point to I think
That's
both
the
your
creative part. The creative part is to break the rules.
and,
You know, how
and
creative are you if you're following the grammar rules?
well,
Yeah.
it's the creative part, but it's also you're doing it in a way that makes the whole story more effective.
Mhm.
You know, if you're just doing it because you want to have, you know, someone say like tarantula in the middle of a sentence, like who cares? You know, like I'm not gonna run out in the middle of the street and scream
That's not a
tarantula.
rule breaker. I do that all the time.
But I mean, yeah, it's just actually, so someone actually pitched to me. She found a bunch of letters from her parents when they were coming up, and they really tell a really interesting story, but she doesn't have the answer to half the questions associated with, like, well, how did you get to this part? And so, you know, part of the reason she met with me was she wanted to understand, is she allowed to do that, right? So take real letters or a variation of them and then fill in the blanks of what she assumes, or based on her research and the time period, most likely occurred to get you to the next letter, to get you to the response. And I said, yeah, that's called creative nonfiction. Of course you can do that, right? I mean, it's better to do it once these people are dead, and they are. It's smarter not to actually take someone's personal letters and, you know, start spreading it all over the world. But, you know, it's finding those interesting creative ways of bringing forward stories that probably wouldn't be heard otherwise. And a lot of times you can do that through playing with that, the formulation or the presentation of those stories. So Dawn says, my first editor was a saint. She took a real mess and helped me turn it into a book. Not sure how she had the patience. Well, we are all thankful for that, Dawn, because we had the pleasure of publishing one of your novels. So that is truly, truly awesome.
That editor was a saint too.
He was. I don't know who that was, but
Hi, Don.
I honestly, I think my other big motivator, you know, somewhat selfishly, was the first. Dawn's like, yes, he was. One of the first, I wouldn't say first editors, but I had had so many experiences from going to workshops and conferences and and so on, where people read my work and it was obvious the feedback they gave me, or even submitting work to like an agent, right? Or actually usually agents who used assistants, that the feedback they gave me, I thought, what does this have to do with what I sent you? You know? And, you know, later on I'd realize, like, especially if I was like in my MFA, you know, I'm in a group, when I read their work, I realized they just basically gave me feedback that it's like their subconscious knew was wrong with their own work. And they were like projecting it onto what I had submitted, you know, or like they were really strong at, you know, world building. And so decided that the level of detail, which was basically what their core strength was missing in my work. But that's not my prose don't have to read like your voice, nor should it, right? So I didn't want other people to experience that, because I knew so many aspiring writers who had similar tales, and it was just completely devastating, right? It just depended on how knowledgeable that individual was about, like, so what should I take when I get criticism, and what should I, leave behind? And so much of my own personal journey involved basically getting bitch slapped several times and going, wait a minute, but how come this is not as good as it was, before? And, I made all the changes you asked me to do. And now you're coming back and asking like, well, why'd you make that change? Do you want me to quote you what you sent me? Because that's what I did, Like I wanted to build a world in, and I think the three of us have done really solidly in doing that. An environment where it truly is collaborative, and we're not looking at people's work saying, trying to force them to have our voices, right? Nor are any of our editors. We're looking at people's works and asking leading questions, because it's, if the person comes back and says, well, we're doing this for this, and this reason, and it's solid, I'm like, all right, cool. But if they come back and it's like, why, I don't honestly know why, or I haven't thought about it that way, or, let me try this instead, then I'm not telling you anything. I just asked you questions to try and help you understand how you yourself can make this the best piece possible. So.
I had that in a short story once. It was an antique shop, and there was something about a pair of evening gloves, ladies' gloves, that there was just something missing. And so I made the suggestion to the author, and she said, in my original version, I had that in there, but it was workshopped, and they said, take it out. And I said, no, you can't take that out. You've got to have that in there. And she was so glad to hear a different opinion. And somebody was wrong there, and it wasn't us. It was the workshop. But it really comes down to neither one of them was wrong. It would have worked either way, but to have the author validated to the point where, okay, let's put those gloves back in there. Whatever's going on with the gloves, she put it back in the story, and it strengthened the story from my editing point of view. And from hers too. That was the good conversation we had.
Well, yeah, you look.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you get to a point, I hope, as a writer goes to workshops, which is a great idea, where all these comments are just comments. They're just suggestions. They're not saying do this. Say 18 people out of 20 say do this. Well, do you want to? Does it make the story better in your mind? If 3 people say, you can't whipsaw around, or you shouldn't whipsaw around based on different people's opinions. Just take them into consideration, ponder it from 3 or 4 different angles, which the workshop is great for, and then see how you want to treat it. Obviously Ben's our writer, really wanted to keep the gloves in the story, but thought that somebody else's opinion was more important than hers. Well, thank goodness Ben came along and says, no, you're important. I lost my word. Your point of view is what's important. Your opinion is what's important. So.
Yeah, exactly. Don McIntyre says, we have to remember that we're not writing to the order of a critique group member. I usually say, well, if a publisher wants me to change that, I will. It's funny, the number of authors who've been very successful have actually had similar comments, where, it's one thing. It's one thing if you're just in a critique group and someone throws out a ton of feedback. And it's another thing if you're working with an editor, and the editor, like at a publishing house, and the editor's coming back with things that maybe you just never thought about, On the other hand, I also know people who have left publishing houses because the editor didn't actually understand what was happening in the work. And I won't say that that's common, but I would say that I've heard that a few times in my writing and editing career. So it is something to keep in mind. Like, I think both to Peter and Ben's points, if your inner critic is going, why would you do that? Then, maybe take a couple steps back, allow yourself to kind of absorb it. And if your inner critic continues saying, why would you do that? Then it's probably not a good idea. Don says, some people are wonderful at critique. Others just want to make everyone in the group write it their way. And I honestly, I really do think those who are doing that, who are giving criticism based on what they personally would do, I don't think they know that that's what they're doing. I truly think that this is just how they know how to write. And so they're giving feedback based on what they personally feel is successful. So, and with that, we're actually over time, believe it or not, which is like crazy. It went so fast. As always, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Don. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, everybody who joined us. Don't forget, we have changed dates and times. We are now Wednesdays from 5 to 6 p.m. Pacific time, 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern time. If you can't make that, it's not a big deal. You can always just go ahead and check out the recordings. And hope to see you next week. Cool. All right. Bye, guys.
Next week.